Hello everyone, it's great to see you. It really feels endless. I am continuously facing endless questions and allegations. I can't possibly answer every single one, but let me offer a way to think about it. If, back in 2015 or 2016, things had gone according to my plan, if Samsung or POSCO had hard-forked Bitcoin, no matter what name they chose to give it, Bitstone, that was my idea, where every time people played the game of Go, Bitcoins would be distributed. When a master plays a novice, they would receive Bitstones. And there would be a claim period so that any UTXOs holding Bitcoin would expire if not claimed. Had we done that earlier than Bitcoin Cash, what do you think would have happened? Today I released emails from August 2016 that I exchanged with the head of blockchain at Samsung, with personal details redacted. Lotto was in the loop, POSCO was there, and HomePlus as well. And there were plenty of general investors too. I faced far more refusals, indifference, and humiliations than you might imagine. How could it have been otherwise? A properly educated guy was shouting about Bitcoin after all. Just a few days ago, someone offered to introduce me to the person overseeing blockchain at a major Korean conglomerate. I turned it down because it's not the right time yet, and from my experience, after hearing about their background, I don't think there's anything I can say to convince them right now. I think it would be hard for them to understand. I've become a bit cynical at this point. But back in 2015, 2016, or 2017, I wasn't like this. The reason I created GNC in 2018 wasn't just to hard fork Bitcoin. Sure, that was one element, but mainly as a marketing lever. You know, Bitcoin has a layer structure, the so-called omni layer, right? We needed to build on that to secure governance coins. Instead of building directly on top of Bitcoin itself, we copied Bitcoin to create something called GNC, then planned to add the omni layer on top of that to issue Gene NFTs there, had we secured another 1 billion KRW. Then around 2020, about a year before the big NFT DeFi boom, we could have launched Celebrity Gene tokens as well. It's a bit of a shame, really. Those who knew about it also feel that regret deeply. But what can we do? Back in 2015 to 2016, the people I was dealing with didn't understand monetary phenomena. And in 2019, the executives at my parent company had no idea an NFT market was coming. So today, what I want to discuss with all of you is this: commerce. Yes, commerce. Commerce is a theme that truly torments those of us with intellect. At a glance, commerce looks like it doesn't really do much. After all, whatever commerce can do, bureaucrats can do as well. The state can take it on. Why did the Bretton Woods system lean so heavily on the nation state? Here's one interpretation. I included it in my book as well. During World War I and II, wartime economies were in operation. Those wartime economies were essentially communist systems, where the state handles everything through a bureaucratic system. Even if there are private companies in the mix, they're subordinate. Bureaucrats created detailed plans: how many pens to make, how many tanks, how many guns, structuring everything from the top down. And during war, they procure and ration food to the people. After winning the war, and I'm talking about the United States here, they were able to take that very same system and transition it into a welfare state model within Keynesian thought. The true golden age of Keynesianism didn't come from winning academic or economic debates, but from the fact that the state gained capacity within the social system. So, in the 20th century, on one extreme end you had communism, which completely severed all aspects of the market. And on the other, even in the so-called free world, you had massive state-centered, quasi-socialist systems. And together, these forms of state control came to dominate the 20th century. I don't have the book at home now, but there's a book, Full House, by Stephen Jay Gould, the famed evolutionary biologist who later passed away from cancer. It's his book. It's essentially a statistics book. What's striking is not the early chapters on evolution, but the later part. Why 0.400 hitters disappeared? Gould, being a statistics-savvy scholar, dives into the numbers, specifically US baseball statistics. Under the same, largely unchanged rules, there's a massive trove of big data. When I read other statistics books or run statistical data using the R language, I notice there's a lot of baseball data in the US. So this author takes that and starts exploring the question, why are there no more 0.400 hitters? But usually when people ask, why don't we see 0.400 hitters anymore? Well, it's been about 100 years since we've had one. As for the question of why 0.400 hitters disappeared, one claim is that pitchers improved. But did only pitchers improve while hitters didn't? That doesn't really make sense, does it? Others say defense got better. That doesn't quite add up either. So why have hitters stagnated? Stripping away all the ideas of other people, looking with a fresh perspective. I often talk about Gombrich, like how someone who came from Mars looks at the essence of things from a completely new angle, Gould offers a fundamentally new perspective, and this is something truly important. In fact, in the intellectual history of Korea, this point isn't really emphasized much. But in reality, it's deeply connected to the debates over social systems. Listen carefully. I'm revealing this here especially in Genealogy of Wisdom. We learn about normal distributions, values spread around the mean. It's a distribution created by things like flipping coins or rolling dice. Since it reflects the patterns of nature so well, we use it as it is. But we don't see the idea of a .400 hitter in terms of distance. We don't view it as a relative distance, but we have a habit of seeing it as an absolute figure. In other words, we think of an exceptional hitter as having some fixed absolute value. The term .400 itself means getting a hit 4 or more times out of 10 at-bats. So it feels like some kind of absolute number. But Gould suggests that we should see it as the distance or deviation from the average. So when we talk about a .400 hitter, we're really being asked to pay attention to how much of an outlier that value is. How unusually and independently it stands apart from the average of other hitters. And here's why. This requires a historical perspective. US Pro Baseball is roughly 130 years old. The games haven't always been the same. In other words, to make the game more exciting, sometimes they elevate the pitcher's mound, and sometimes they lowered the pitcher's mound. Pitchers throw from higher up, really driving the ball down. And they've also adjusted the strike zone, sometimes widening it, sometimes narrowing it. They've been making adjustments to keep things balanced. So what does that mean? It means that a .400 in the 1930s versus a hypothetical .400 today cannot represent the same level of skill. You can't compare them that way. So for a .400 hitter in the 1930s, what matters is how far above the average hitters of that time he was. And for today, even though there are no .400 hitters, our best hitters should be judged by how far they stand from the current average. Gould's key claim is this. The normal distribution that spreads out around the mean becomes narrower over time. And the reason for that is that it hits what's called the right wall. In other words, over the past 100 years, the skills of professional baseball players in the US, not just fielders but hitters too, have steadily improved. They've been getting better, but there must be some kind of limit, right? Humans can't run at the speed of light after all. Even though we can't see the exact limit, if we think of it as a right wall, the average keeps moving closer and closer to that right wall, and as it does, the variation around the average gets smaller. It gets thinner. An outstanding hitter is one who stands the farthest from the mean. But now, even they're getting closer and closer to that average. Why does this mechanism operate? One reason is this. MLB offers high salaries and is so popular. It attracts top players from all over the world. So the overall caliber of play keeps improving. In the early days, there was a big variation in players' abilities. But over time, those differences, the gaps in skill have steadily narrowed. Another factor, poor hitters are relentlessly weeded out. Those who underperform don't get renewed next season. Attrition trims the tail, resulting in performance clustering near the mean. So the disappearance of .400 hitters isn't because pitchers got better, or because fielding became more scientific, or because hitters alone stopped improving. It's simply that baseball, as a sport, exists within such intense competition that it converges toward a system equilibrium. Yes, convergence to the system. It becomes standardized, fitting into a predictable framework. There's a deep implication here. After the Soviet Revolution, their system lasted 70 years. In the early period, because right after World War I, Western Europe and the US were struggling, the Soviet side was initially considered to be doing better. So in the US, quite a few intellectuals developed a pro-Soviet mindset. But why did we learn that communism doesn't work? Because even if you don't work hard, you're rewarded the same. So why would anyone work hard, right? But here's a reframing of the question. Munkar Olson changed the question. People tend to look at communism from the perspective that it was bound to fail, though of course they say that after it already collapsed. They view it as necessarily doomed. But Munkar Olson poses a different question. How did a system like that manage to last for 70 years? To the question of how it endured that long, one of Munkar Olson's answers is that even within the communist system, there existed a kind of market economy. It wasn't an open market, but among the bureaucratic elites. There was a system where, say, a rubber factory, a shoe factory, and a boot factory would exchange their surplus goods with one another. Intermediaries arose, adapted to it, and after the Soviet collapse, they grew into oligarchs. Thanks to their coordinating role, there was at least some rationality, not just bureaucratic rigidity. Initially, a central price bureau set prices and directed the production of goods, allocating rubber, lumber, and cloth to factories. But plans never fit reality perfectly. due to the limitations of information. So the tire factory might have rubber left over, while the leather shoe factory lacks rubber, and so they would trade. And while brokering those deals, they skim a little off the top. It's tacitly permitted. And occasionally there are purges because it's corruption. Even so, those illicit exchanges provided breathing room and kept the system moving. That's one perspective. What Stephen Jay Gould identified, and what he teaches through the chapter on why .400 hitters disappeared, is this. It offers an answer to the question, how did the Soviet system last 70 years, economically speaking? There is an answer. Because for well-understood tasks, human performance can converge to the mean. Even without strong market incentives, it can converge to the mean. In other words, it means that bureaucratic systems can actually be more productive than we tend to think. That is, as long as discipline and occasional punishment are applied appropriately. Most importantly, communism, much like a religion, also has its devout believers. In other words, we tend to think that if everyone gets the same pay and the same rations, no matter how hard they work, people would all just become lazy. And that is true. Generally, they were lazy. They were actually even lazier than you'd expect. Yet even so, because there have been passionate believers who truly see communism as the ideal of equality, the ultimate stage of human civilization, just like the Chongbekni, upright, incorruptible officials of Joseon, there were honest and diligent bureaucrats among them. These people work even without any incentives. And when discipline and punishment are applied in the right way, human work can converge into a functioning system. So surprisingly, it works. Why am I bringing this up? Because people have long believed that commerce doesn't really produce anything. So, well, they're not the farmer who grows the apples, but is just the distributor. Not even the delivery man himself, but just someone who buys them in bulk and sells them piece by piece for profit. Wouldn't it be better if we could deal directly without them? That's a thought we all have. And because commerce has that reputation, the well-known trading routes often get monopolized, or else the state simply takes over to run them, forming official guilds or bureaus for control. No new initiative can really arise. So when it comes to these established trading systems, the known commercial activities may start off with entrepreneurial spirit, but they gradually become state enterprises. Then the state takes them over entirely. Even if it doesn't, it heavily taxes or extracts from them. Those who pay the tribute, the caravans, are granted exclusive trading rights. Should we call them merchants, or rather semi-officials of the state? The line becomes blurred. People who dream of communism tend to be very Platonic in their thinking, so they detest waste. In a philosophical system that pursues structural perfection, there's hardly any place for commercial activity. That's just known. So you can just break down the act of trade into delivery, storage, or assembly. The very idea of seeking profit through commerce simply doesn't make sense in that framework. Not that Stephen Jay Gould himself thought this way, but this kind of worldview. Not that Stephen Jay Gould himself thought this way. But baseball as a game is thoroughly known. Because everything about it is known, and because its rules are fixed and controlled. Within that framework, it's a phenomenon in which you see this kind of convergence happening. Known trade routes for goods like pepper or tea can simply be monopolized by installing tolls along them, which makes them less commerce than administration. Commerce decomposed into the physical act of loading camels and transporting goods along fixed paths. That's something bureaucrats can easily manage, right within their system. Even when they subcontract it, they don't hire merchants with true entrepreneurship. They hire politically connected ones who can lobby well. And even if the state takes most of the profit, no one really complains, because commerce itself barely creates new wealth. It's logistics and warehousing that generate value. The act of storage created it. So then what is commerce? That's why we must read Hayek. All of this logic shows that we're trapped in a kind of Platonic way of thinking. It appears partly in reality, but it's far from the whole story. We live amid countless failures, yet we're cherry-picking only the successes. The state system itself is doing that. So out of countless cases, like with pepper or tea, the seasons when it's delivered, the times of harvest, from all those countless trials and errors, only the successful ones get cherry-picked afterward by the bureaucrats. That process can dismantle commerce itself. Then all that remains is manufacturing, transportation, and storage. Nothing else. The only thing left is finance. And if the state handles finance too, commerce becomes unnecessary. So when we pursue the aesthetic ideal of minimizing social waste, those that excel in mathematics. If someone excels in mathematics, there's a subtle tendency. I noticed it even among my college friends. Those with brilliant mathematical reasoning had a very conclusive worldview, because in their own way, they're constantly pursuing efficiency to eliminate any waste in reasoning. But their worldview differs from mine, because what I look at is this. Once you've found the route, you can cherry pick from there and stick with the successful cases. But how do you know it'll succeed? Once you pose that question, they face a wall. The Soviet system had two key factors. First, even within it, there were market-like functions, which, though technically corrupt within that system, allowed it to keep operating. Second, there were diligent bureaucrats who brought about a kind of convergence toward the mean. Yet ultimately, it was the Soviet economy that was the first to make semiconductors, as far as I know. They were capable of that. After all, they launched the Sputnik satellite first. Yet even with that level of technology, in the end, they were doomed to collapse, because bureaucrats are terrible at dealing with things whose success or failure can't be predicted. Only those with entrepreneurship, merchants can take those risks. They face countless failures. They fail, those merchants. They go bankrupt. But if they manage this well and organize their portfolios carefully, they can turn one of those many failures into success and sustain their business. So when we step away from the Platonic worldview toward one that's indeterministic, where ignorance is ever present, in the worldview we live in, one that assumes ignorance is not a sin, a merchant's activity isn't just a combination of transport, storage, and finance. So even if you dismantle the role of merchants, transport separately, warehousing separately, and finance separately, that doesn't mean merchants become unnecessary. The merchant's most essential act is, dot by dot, to connect unknown dots of information, to generate new data, and ultimately combine it into information. The reason merchants can do this is because they take responsibility for failure. They are the ones who bear that burden. By taking that responsibility, they gather small fragments of data and turn them into information. Then retrospectively, we can extract and use that information. In the end, merchants create information. So why am I bringing this up? There are two reasons. We're all shocked right now, because things are too smart. That's why AI and big data will eventually summon Plato again. When AI and big data combine, people will once again ask, what's left for the merchant to do? It's inevitable. Through participating in this debate, I've realized people's minds are fundamentally deterministic in worldview. Deterministic. So everyone is under the illusion they understand events that only became clear in hindsight. That's really how humans are. They have no idea about tomorrow, yet they know yesterday all too well. They agonize over the uncertainty of tomorrow. But when it comes to yesterday, everything suddenly becomes deterministic. When it comes to AI and big data, Jack Ma once said some nonsense about that. He claimed that big data would even help communism advance. He said that kind of ridiculous thing, but just because he said it, the Chinese authorities didn't let it slide. He ended up getting taken away somewhere. But that's the same logic as saying that even 1920s and 1930s, if the state could process all information, there would be no need for merchants. In other words, a market without merchants shouldn't exist at all. That's how that argues. And with AI and big data today, for what's already known, you can force the system to converge, regress everything to the mean, and though there will be variables, you can keep only the controllable known parts and just produce those. If you can cheaply make just the known stuff, then you can decompose the entrepreneur's role. Turn part of it into manufacturing, another part into transportation, another into storage and warehousing, and the rest into finance. Then why should we keep merchants fed at all? That question naturally follows, and it's a fair doubt, because if you pursue efficiency, merchants seem unnecessary. But merchants, through failure, through repeated failures, create information. People don't value that highly enough. And here's why. When people think about the past, as I said with Leibniz, they say it was inevitable. It couldn't have happened otherwise. They go even further. Someone would have done it anyway. That's the conclusion they reach. So what we call lost coins now, I suggested we rename them unknown coins. You just need to know they're lost coins. But as I said, they're unknown coins. Now, if we were to try today what I failed to do back in 2015 and 2016, when I was talking with POSCO, HomePlus, Lotte, and Samsung, do you really think that we, just a few hundred of us, small players, not even numbering 1,000, could succeed in building an ecosystem? I can't promise success. In 2015 to 16, success was almost certain. I was confident. And in hindsight, with Bitcoin Cash, you could say we proved the point. Even so, Bitcoin still matters. Some say I've contradicted myself about Bitcoin, but I think they idealize me. So think about this, everyone. As unfortunate as it is, Satoshi Nakamoto didn't actually secure 1 million coins. That's the reality of Bitcoin. And unfortunately, I, Otemin, who intended to hard fork Bitcoin, have no intention of doing that and distributing it for free. And unfortunately, the person who has studied the phenomenon of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin monetary phenomenon longer than anyone in Korea, formulating the most meaningful ideas about it, and continue to do so even now, isn't someone who lives on due and plans to live by writing books. He's a businessman. It's just that the business didn't succeed. But I've been doing this for a long time. Since 2014, when I first discovered Bitcoin, I pitched it to my acquaintances. What disappointed me was, at lectures, no one asked, how much is in your head? No one asked that. They always only asked, should I buy now or not? Questions like that. No one asked me, as someone who discovered Bitcoin, how much value do you think you have in your head? Had anyone asked, I would have said 10 trillion. I truly thought that back then. I never imagined people would fail so much to grasp the monetary phenomenon that they'd dismiss my ideas. So I assumed success was a given. But I realized this. People find monetary phenomena very hard. So it isn't easy. We're still in that same line of thought. If we devolve into personal attacks, how miserable is that? From the outside too. We're having a higher order debate here. So those on the other side are operating with a deterministic worldview. That's how they end up with a mantra like this. Only Bitcoin is good. Everything else is a scam. I've called that an a priori claim. I said priori, shortening it, but others corrected it back to a priori. Right? An a priori proposition. I'd like to update that. Make it Bayesian. As a rule of thumb, stick to Bitcoin. But not once have I shouted things like, I've said Bitcoin matters. But did I ever say only Bitcoin matters? Apart from Bitcoin, did I call all altcoins scams? I said, I don't know. When I debated Cardano once, I said I'd read the white paper, and I wasn't sure. And for saying that, they made a huge fuss. I said I didn't know. Did I say it couldn't work? You misunderstood me. I also run businesses in parallel, and never once have I said I don't do business. You should also be realistic. Lower your expectations. Unfortunately, the person you might imagine, someone in Korea who's been living off due for the past 9 years, studying only Bitcoin, fighting with altcoin people, and defending Bitcoin alone. Someone who isn't a businessman and has no desire to make money. That's not who I am. What can you do? That's the reality. You do it then. Put your face out there like I do. Put your own reputation on the line. It might sound snarky, but that's how it looks to me. No matter how moral you think you are, as if superior to me, even if you judge me. So what? Can you buy my 9 years with money? These emails keep surfacing. There's plenty of evidence. So, even though you look down on me like this, I was honestly surprised, really. Yes, okay. I suppose I have to acknowledge it too. Surprisingly, the people outside, the ones that don't even watch my videos, actually think well of me and even want to connect me with companies. But I'm pretty worn out right now. And at the moment, although some people support me, with this level of energy, it's tough. How can small players... I'd be amazed if the ants pulled it off. Even with Samsung or Lotte. Had we done it before 2017, we might have succeeded. But ants doing it without selling? That's not easy. But let me say this. With GNC, just for practice, use it to practice Bitcoin. And yes, the supply is limited. If a company now hard forks Bitcoin and builds on an existing ecosystem to issue a governance coin, I'd propose to that company that we build a trade finance platform. What you're misunderstanding is, this isn't a challenge to Bitcoin. Just because it replicates the Bitcoin phenomenon doesn't mean that it's saying, since it's unfair, let's start over. That's not it. Someone twisted it that way. Using the monetary principles that Bitcoin has shown us, let's create a non-tradable governance coin, build a layer 2 on top of it, and use that to develop a trade finance platform. Why do we have to do it this way? Because saying, just get approved as a security and do it legitimately as one, that's not blockchain. That's just securities, by my definition. Blockchain isn't meant to be used for that purpose. The reason you might not understand this is because you haven't studied blockchain as deeply as I have, so you don't really know what it's meant for. Even if it's not fully decentralized, blockchain still has real usefulness. And that's what I want to show you. So this requires discussions with companies. If companies are willing to listen, they can take the monetary principles Bitcoin revealed and apply them through blockchain's functions. And this doesn't require full decentralization, because after all, in trade finance, someone has to guarantee transactions. And inside that system lies a forest of oracle problems. Still, it's meaningful. A blockchain with no oracle issues. The only use for such a blockchain might be running probabilistic games in the metaverse, betting on outcomes. That's one case without an oracle issue. That's what Vitalik Buterin also talks about. That's the a priori type, meaning there are data points that the system itself can generate. Information that the system can generate internally is limited, but there are a few that don't rely on external input. Without outside injection, if you use only self-generated data to create a smart contract economy, sure, then there's no oracle problem. But the problem is it's nearly useless. That's why some external info needs to flow in. For example, or political events, even assassinations, you can inject those lightly. Say there's an earthquake in Turkey. You built a prediction market for it, and it's widely reported in the media. Then the selling point will be the earthquake happened. It wouldn't make sense if no earthquake won. So that's the level we're talking about. But in trade finance, every stage requires guarantees. When you provide those guarantees, you don't necessarily need decentralization. People misunderstand blockchain. So blockchain can be partially and selectively applied. And yet, despite all that, I'm saying this before someone clips it out of context, this idea of decentralization isn't really decentralization from the standpoint of countries like the US or Korea. It involves multinational corporations from these nations, not decentralized though. And these entities have to compete against nation states. And the countries they're competing against aren't the US or China. They're the corrupt states in Central Asia or Africa. In those regions, bureaucrats with absolutely no sense of public service exploit their own citizens through the current exchange rate and financial systems. But when multinational corporations push in using blockchain, producers can trade directly without escrow or intermediaries. Without escrow or intermediaries. If that sounds unclear, read my book more carefully. Who taught you that blockchain must be fully decentralized, or else it's worthless? When did I ever say everything but Bitcoin is a scam? And when did I abuse the a priori statement? Did I ever say all future coins are scams except Bitcoin? I was trained in a worldview that rejects determinism. So if I ever said that, it was a slip, not what I believe. Still, many altcoins are scams, so caution is needed. For laypeople with limited knowledge, investing just from reading white papers is difficult and risky. So the Bitcoin maximalist mantra makes sense in that regard. Even if they say only Bitcoin or everything else is probably a scam, listeners take it as high scam probability. Because everyone's chasing quick money. So yes, it's strong language, but useful ones. But seeing attacks on me, it's gone too far. Seeing these misunderstandings, I feel I must respond. Elites manipulate currency. Bitcoin emerged because of that manipulation. But we can't avoid working with elites. Do I deny their existence entirely? I criticize elites, but in context I'm urging them to look at this seriously. I really want to ask, are you living inside the prison of language? Or building a new world of your own? You hardcore Bitcoin maxes? Do you truly envision a world where you pay solely in Bitcoin without the US dollar or Korean won? With no central banks, no conglomerates, a pure self-sufficient world just for you? Have you solved the question I posed? Suppose the US stops issuing dollars? Then they'll have to collect taxes directly. Otherwise, the US Navy won't be able to maintain its aircraft carriers. From the Strait of Malacca to the Strait of Hormuz and the Indian Ocean, and even our regional waters, they wouldn't be able to defend them. So taxes must be collected. But in order to extract those taxes, the US has been issuing dollars within its own system. And that made the process rather smooth. Now imagine Bitcoin replaces the dollar. Then, as libertarians believe, you'll move to purely intermediary trade, but the freedom of navigation won't be protected. Do you really think there are no pirates? That everyone on the sea acts like angels out there? Do you hold such a naive, ahistorical worldview? I want to ask the Bitcoin maximalists this. If you deny all elites and reject all nation-states, what exactly do you gain from that? Bitcoin maximalists, do you truly believe such a world will come? Honestly, do you believe there's a way to import oil cheaply without aircraft carriers? That's my question. Have a good day. Thank you.